I would love it if we just take a quick moment as I'm looking across all your names just to, in the question and answer box, tell me where you are, who you are, where you're from, and what your role is with the school organization you are with. So please say hello and let us know who you are. Love to know who the group is and why it is that you're joining us here today. So I'll give a moment for that. Just while you are all letting me know who you are, let me just share with you my background and how I come to this. So I have been involved with School Improvement Network for about 2 decades now, and my career has been fascinating. The opportunity that I've had is to be able to travel primarily over North America, but even beyond North America, searching out really amazing schools, what they do and how they go about succeeding with all students. And so just to be clear, I have a real bias for the potential that schools have, and schools can really do everything necessary so that all kids can learn. And what we'll be talking about today when we are describing growth and competency is how teachers can grow and develop within their own skill set and in order to better serve all students in a highly effective way. And Milana, thank you for saying hello. So Milana says she's a teacher for the last 5 years in a preschool in New York City. Excellent. It's so often with these we have administrators who join and whatnot, but I really appreciate you joining, Milana, for the power of this teacher perspective that you bring to this. Please continue, the rest of you, saying who you are and why you're joining today. As you're sharing that, I'm going to jump in. And so I have shown you here just a little diagram, and I do this deliberately. I begin the conversation with how is it that we have traditionally approached professional development. And so as you look at this, traditional PD really begins with the district or the system. And the system determines what it is that teachers need to learn. So the district may come and say, we're going to have a theme this year on rigor and highly effective questioning. And so they set that theme. The school system may also provide a catalog of PD opportunities that's fairly wide-ranging. But so the district designs the PD and then delivers it, turns around, provides it to the teachers. The teacher receives the PD, and then there's some sort of an evaluative measure at the end of it, which could be as simple as getting credit for participating in the PD. Yes, you showed up and you participated, so here's your PD credit. Could include a bit of a reflection, something more complex, but in essence, traditional PD begins with the district or the school system, delivered out to the teachers, and then some sort of measurement at the end. So I have a question for all of you, and again, please enter it in the question and answer box there. But how would you define, what adjectives would you use to describe the teacher's role in this traditional professional development process? What words might you use? So I'll give you a second to respond, and I'll see your answers here on my end, and I'll share them out with everybody. So how would you describe the teacher's participation in this traditional approach to professional development? Designed by the system, delivered, even delivered on target. The teacher is there as a recipient and then gets credit for participating. So I often go through this exercise with groups of educators across the U.S. And what I love, Milana, you responded that with words such as loving, caring, educational, guiding, helpful. I really appreciate that you gave that response, because I think what you have identified in those words, Milana, is the nature of a teacher. You know, the teacher showing up really with that sense of loving and caring, that desire to learn in order to turn around and help the students. And without question, that defines why people enter the profession, why they become teachers in the first place. So, but when you think about the challenge of traditional PD, what happens is the teacher is a passive participant in this. And so, who really owns the learning in this scenario? It's the school system. The school system is determining this is what needs to be learned. This is how we're going to deliver it. We expect the teacher to show up and participate, and we'll give them credit for participating. And what I'm going to throw out, based upon your response, Milana, I'm not entirely sure that this approach to professional development is truly reflective of that inherent nature of the teacher. And so I want to present a different way of looking at professional development. And it's really personalizing it or centering it to the needs of the teacher. And so in this scenario, we are focusing, we begin first and foremost with understanding who is the teacher and what is that teacher's needs and interests. And that entirely defines how it is that we organize and deliver the professional development. So, if I have a teacher, let's say I have Miss Smith, and I've been working with Miss Smith, and I know that Miss Smith is working on her lesson design and can definitely, learn a lot more about highly effective lesson design. But Ms. Smith sees that she has a personal need more in terms of her classroom management. That's what Ms. Smith is saying she wants to work on. Okay, so in a teacher-centered approach to professional development, I really have to understand who is Ms. Smith and where is she at and what is she trying to accomplish? What growth does she personally want to engage in? So now that I understand this teacher and the teacher's at the center of this process, well, I can turn around and consider the nature of the teaching standards. How is it that the teacher is performing as measured by those standards? Different than saying, I'm going to use one of those standards, such as classroom management, to design a PD. I'm going to look at it and say, well, I want to understand how effective Ms. Smith is in her classroom management, and I'll use the standards to help me assess that. So the standards serve more as that guide, a way of helping me understand and define an individual's application or performance in the classroom, instead of being a source of curriculum. So first I understand who the teacher is, how it is that I'm measuring or defining this teacher's performance in relation to the teaching standards. Now I can really consider who is the supportive coach or principal, instructional leader, etc., who might be best as a mentoring peer with this particular teacher. And so as you think about how school systems work, school systems tend to organize the mentor or the coach or the instructional leader based on hierarchy, rather than based upon a working relationship. And so a traditional approach to PD, well, your instructional coach, it's assigned to you because that coach is assigned to this particular school, you work in this particular school. Whether or not the two of you trust each other and work well together, it's a hierarchical proposition. In a teacher-centered approach, I'm really going to look at it and think, who is the best mentor for this particular teacher? Who is that instructional leader who's best suited in terms of style and approach and experience to support this individual teacher? So, think through this, follow with me on this argument. We're designing the professional development experience to be explicitly centered, with the teacher at the center, to be organized around the needs and interests and learning styles of this particular teacher. Where this becomes fun is that when we start to hand over the control of the professional learning to the teacher. And the supports designed for this teacher really, are in full respect and fully reflect the needs of that teacher. Now we get to look at choice and accountability. Remember that in that traditional model, passive is a guiding word which defines this experience for the teacher. The teacher doesn't have an active role in what the professional development is that he or she is engaging in. So, but when we give the teacher choice in their professional development, so again, remember that I said Ms. Smith might need to work on lesson design, but is actually choosing to work on classroom management. When we hand choice over, what we actually invite back is accountability. And you really have to think about adult learning in this context. It's a fascinating thing to consider, and the research is bearing this out. But my daughter a couple of years ago was a kindergartner. So when you think about working with a kindergarten student, Milana, the preschool age students that you're working with, the younger the student, the easier it is to convince that student that the learning you're providing matters to them. In a kindergarten class, I need a student to buy into the fact that they need to learn their ABCs. Well, I can have an interactive activity. I can, we can sing the ABC song. I'm going to quickly win that student over. That student will start to see value in that learning. But as we grow older, every single grade that we progress, it takes more effort on the part of the teacher to convince the learner or the student that the learning here, the teacher is providing matters to them. And so by the time we're adults, we bought into the idea that I get to choose what I want to learn rather than someone else, even an authority figure, telling me this is what you need to learn. And the interesting thing is when you layer professionalism on top of this, we even emphasize that. So when professional development is designed without clear choice as to what the teacher is engaging in, we're actually inviting a lack of accountability on the part of the educator. But if we incorporate choice into this, well, we're inviting accountability. And the analogy that I always give around this is think about someone who engages in a hobby. My hobby is cooking. If any of you, want to state on the question, what is a hobby you have? But I really love, I love thinking about hobbies as a way of understanding how adults, adults engage in learning. So my hobby is cooking. If I decide that I want to figure out a particular recipe, no one has told me I need to figure out how to make great lasagna. I want to make great lasagna. I will naturally, of my own volition, engage in the necessary research. I'm going to try it out. May or may not work. I'm going to try it again. I'm going to keep practicing and refining it until my lasagna is perfect. Who's driving the accountability in my hobby? Well, it's only one person. It's me. And that's because I am able to make my choice in terms of how I engage in my hobby. We can have the same power in a professional development setting. We can set this up by inviting teachers, educators, to have choice in their learning. What is it they want to work on? Who do they want to collaborate with? What learning resources do they want to turn to? Do they want to turn to a book? Do they want to go to a workshop? Do they want to engage a peer? So in order for professional development to really be teacher-centered, we have to, build choice into this whole process. And then the fourth component of this teacher-centered approach to professional development is culture and relevancy. And this is a piece which we have done a very poor job of in education, recognizing, honoring who the teacher is. What experiences do they show up with? What was school like for them? What teachers matter to them? Who are they? Where do they come from? Their demographics, race and income and all the rest. Well, all of these factors, if they impact students in their learning, and as a teacher in the classroom, I have to make sure that the learning is culturally relevant for my students, then it matters in adult learning as well. It matters to the professional. Does the professional development reflect who I am and what I care about? So I just present this to help frame this conversation on growth and competency, because I really think that we have to philosophically embrace this idea of a teacher-centered approach to professional development in order to understand what a growth, or how a growth and competency system works. And actually, I do want to share the comment here from Milana. She says, yes, I agree. I wish teachers did have a choice, because sometimes the professional developments are not useful. Sometimes we need to be about positive reinforcement or behavior management instead of something else. So, Milana, you've absolutely reinforced, what I've been trying to share. This idea that choice has been removed out of so much professional development. We need to bring this back in. Why? So that teachers can really own their own growth, their own learning, their own development. So when we think about professional growth and competency, the overarching, kind of the umbrella goal of all of this is mastery of practice. And you can think about this in terms of, that teacher who you remember. Who's that critical teacher that you had in elementary or middle or high school who really changed the trajectory for you? You knew when you went into that classroom, you were highly engaged in the learning, you knew the teacher cared, and they really helped you see you were smart and capable of succeeding in school. That's a master teacher. They're exhibiting a mastery of practice. So how do we define mastery of practice? Well, sets of standards, teaching standards have been developed. And, there are different sets of standards out there, but really what the standards are trying to identify is a competency, a certain performance level of a set of skills. And so I want to take a moment here and talk about what a standard is, because too often in education, we've confounded standards with curriculum. But a standard is purely a way of defining performance levels. It's an expectation. Speed limits on the roads are a standard. They define a performance level. It is safe to drive this freeway at 65 miles per hour. Now, that standard of 65 miles per hour does not tell you how to drive, does not tell you what lane to change in, does not tell you what car to drive. But it's still a standard of performance. It's something we can all agree on. Yeah, 65 is a safe speed to drive on this freeway. It's a standard. So teaching standards are much the same. Teaching standards don't tell me how I should teach. Teaching standards don't tell me what I should learn in order to teach more effectively. What the standard really says is that if you were to come into my classroom and observe me, you would see these pieces of evidence present in my classroom. You would see me implementing a certain level of practice as defined by that standard. But the standards really represent a collection of skills. And so, if there's a standard around classroom management, well, classroom management is a big, broad topic. There's so much to work on within classroom management. But I can break classroom management down into unique and finite skills. They're much more interpretable, that I can learn around, that I can quickly implement. And so how do you determine the difference between a standard and a skill? Well, this really comes to the evidence. If I'm applying a skill, I can quickly see evidence of its application. So, it's going to the classroom, thinking about classroom management. Well, there may be a skill around facilitating student conversations, student collaboration. That's a specific skill. I'm going to facilitate student collaboration. What evidence am I going to see of that? Well, I'm going to see students talking to one another in an organized way about the learning. And there's going to be much more evidence that I can find around that. But skills are really defined by something finite enough that I can see immediate evidence of its application. So we have to go through this in order to establish this approach to growth and competency. Talking about skills, and you'll see on the screen here picture of my children. So this is Dominic and this is Maya. The reason why I love this picture is because it really illustrates how kids naturally go about developing skills. So Dominic's 11, Maya's 7. This was up at Yellowstone last summer. We go to the spot at Yellowstone called the Boiling River. It's where one of the steaming pots runs into a cold mountain river, and the hot and the cold water mix, and people kind of built up rocks to create almost these little hot tubs in the middle of the river. Really cool place to take the kids. We had a ball there. So we're coming back down the trail to head back. We're leaving Yellowstone that day. And we've already spent a couple of hours at the Boiling River, so it's time for us to go. And my son sees this tree growing out across the river. And he thinks, hey, I want to see if I can actually, if I have enough balance that I can go and stand at the end of this tree over the river. Well, my son's older. He does it fairly quickly. He shows proficiency. Yes, he has balance. My daughter sees her brother doing this and thinks, I want to do this as well. So she sets a standard for herself, which is, I'm going to balance my way out to the end of this tree, out over the river. She's much more hesitant than my son going at it. So at first she tries a little bit, she goes back. Okay, as a father, do I get to say now it's time to go? No. She's not going to give up on this until she has shown proficiency. She chose that she wanted to exhibit proficiency in this skill of balance on a tree. She's not going to leave until she accomplishes it. So she keeps going out and practicing her balance and more and more and more. And eventually she's out at the end of the tree next to my son, happy as all get out. And so the reason why I share this is that when you watch a child choose to do something, they naturally will focus on the skills, and they will practice and practice and practice until they have mastered that particular skill. Well, the same thing applies in professional learning for teachers. So the question, of course, becomes, well, what skills? Great, I want to work on my skills, but how do you define these skills? And so we have to think back to this differentiation of mastery of practice versus a standard versus the skill. So let's say that for the sake of today's discussion, we're going to talk about mastery of practice in terms of building a supportive classroom learning environment. So this is that teacher that has that room. The kids don't want to leave. They're so engaged. They trust the teacher and all the rest. So you can define out this mastery of practice by particular standards. And so 2 standards which would support, which would define what a supportive classroom learning environment looks like would be a safe and respectful learning community. It's one standard. And also effective classroom management. Without question, for me to have this great learning environment, I have to be able to build the learning community. I also have to be able to manage the classroom effectively. Okay, so those are 2 standards or competencies that we can consider. But each of these standards or competencies is supported by a set of skills. So skills which would inform, my ability to build this learning community. Interactions. So how is it that I'm able to build good teacher-to-student interaction, good student-student collaboration? Another skill might be collaboration. Those collaborative structures. And do they make kids feel safe and engaged in the learning? Another skill might be establishing norms and values. And so, do I have the skill at the beginning of the year to establish these norms and values in my classroom so that my students know, yes, this is a learning community that represents me and my interests. Skills which support effective classroom management, routines and procedures. What procedures are in place? Am I establishing and reinforcing this with the student? Another skill may be high expectations. How do I communicate high expectations? How do my students know what they're expected to do? And thirdly, another skill could be interventions. So when a student is acting out, for me to be highly effective in my classroom management, I have to know how to manage those interventions in a way that doesn't disrupt the rest of the classroom. So as you can see, you have mastery or practice, which is defined by standards and really implemented through skills, applied through skills. So I spend a lot of time with groups of educators in different states, and I always will pull up a set of their own standards to illustrate this. This was a particular domain called learning environment in a state that I was at earlier this week. And so this is really how the state has defined their teaching standards for learning environment. Manages classroom space, creates, maintains a climate of safety, maximizes time for instruction, maintains a culture of learning, high expectations, manages student behavior. So these are good descriptions, but I'm going to ask you to please respond in the question. Let's just say we are focusing in on number 5, manages student behavior to provide productive learning opportunities for all students. So that's a standard presented in a state. If I was working with you as a teacher and we determined, through this whole teacher-centered approach to PD, that this is really what you want to work on, managing student behavior to provide productive learning opportunities for all students. How much time, and you can respond to the question, how much time would you ask me to give you to really master this, to figure this out? How much, is it a day? Is it a week? Is it a year? How much time, as you think about, being a professional, do you need to be able to master this particular standard, managing student behavior to provide productive learning opportunities for all students? I'm going to give you a minute just to think about it, respond in the question box, so I can see how the rest of you are thinking around this. How much time would I need to master this particular standard? So as you're writing in your responses, this is always a fascinating question to ask a group of educators. How much time is needed to master a standard? And I have gotten responses on this particular one that range from, could you at least give me a semester, all the way up to 5 years, a whole career? So this is the interesting thing when you consider the way standards have been designed. They're broad. There's lots of things which need to happen in order, for a person to master this particular standard. And Azia, I hope I said your name right. Thank you for, you said a year. Yeah, I would agree. A year, at a minimum. So, but let's see if we can break this down. So this particular state has done a good job at breaking down each of these standards into a more approachable rubric. And so remember, we are looking at manages student behavior to provide productive learning opportunities for all students. So if I look at this rubric, well, I'm getting more description here. Let's say that I'm starting at a 2, establishes, communicates classroom rules and expectations, but overlooks opportunities to reinforce them. Monitors student behavior, but responds inconsistently to inappropriate behavior. So let's say number 2 within this standard, this particular indicator, is what I want to work on. So Ozzy, if you said it would take a year to master that larger standard, how much time, if you and I determined that you were going to work on level 2 here, so establishing, communicating classroom rules and expectations, monitoring student behavior, and you're really trying to move to a 3. So, not overlooking opportunities, responding consistently to inappropriate behavior. How much time would you need to master this? To really be able to work through this, to be able to move from a 2 to a 3. If you said it was a year to master the full standard, how much time would you need to be able to move from a 2 to a 3? So often as I present this challenge, so remember, we have drilled down from the standard. If the standard is taking a year, Milana writes in and says, When she gets new kids each September, it takes about a month to establish some of this classroom rule and expectation. So, okay, so now we're talking about a month. So if I am really trying to manage student behavior in a more effective way, if I'm focused too much on the big standard, it's a year or more. It's a long time. It's hard for me to focus on a particular skill for that long, or particular focus for that long. If we break it down more into these levels, Ozzy as well says about a month. So if I'm trying to move between these levels, I can start looking at at least a month, maybe a couple months, to start showing real improvement. I'm still going to make the argument, I think this is too broad. It's not focused enough. What have I really tried to learn? If you've observed me in my practice and you said I'm a level 2 in this, that I'm overlooking opportunities to reinforce classroom rules and expectations, I'm inconsistently responding to inappropriate behavior, this feels evaluative on one hand, and it doesn't really give me anywhere to go with it. So I want to share with you what we've been working on here at School Improvement Network. And we're basing our work on the ITAC teacher standards. And what the ITAC teaching standards are is it's a nationally recognized set of teaching standards that was developed by the Council of Chief State School Officers, CCSSO, in collaboration with the organization which accredits teacher preparation programs, in collaboration with various administrative groups, even with the NEA. So this was a highly collaborative group that came together and developed the ITAC teaching standards. Again, remember, standards define performance. So the challenge with the ITAC standards, I'm just showing one of the learning progressions here, there's so much information there. So we have to be able to break this down for it to become more efficient, more ready to engage on the part of the teacher. So if you look at this ITAC teaching standard, and the reason why I share ITAC and the state standards is that ITAC actually serves as a foundational component of most state standards. ITAC is the repository in a sense for the research for teaching standards. Most states have developed their localized set of standards based on the ITAC teaching standards. So if I read the ITAC standard on learning environments, teacher works with others to create environments that support individual collaborative learning, encourage positive social interaction, active engagement learning, self-motivation. Again, we are to a big definition, at least a year to be able to work on this. So this is hairy. This is hard for a teacher to fully engage. I want to be highly proficient in creating learning environments. If all I'm looking at is the language of that standard, that's a tough go. The ITAC has broken the standard down into indicators. And so if you look at Teacher Indicator 1 and Teacher Indicator 2, Teacher Indicator 1 is the teacher collaborates with others to build a positive learning climate marked by respect, rigor, and responsibility. Okay, this is much more defined than that parent standard. It gives me a little more focus where I should work. Teacher Indicator 2, the teacher manages the learning environment to engage learners actively. Again, okay, so now Teacher Indicator 2, I'm really focusing on managing the learning environment. But at School Improvement Network, we've really been trying to look at this and say, how can we simplify this even more? How can we provide more focus, more opportunity for skill development to the individual teacher? And so what we've done with this is we've developed a set of skills pathways. And so remember, we talked about this learning environment competency of a positive learning climate. So if the standard is talking about learning environments in a big sense, the indicator is helping me focus in a bit more, well, really, we can look at getting to the competency level with positive learning climate. But positive learning climate is now defined by these particular skills. So if I'm trying to build a positive learning climate, I want to be highly proficient in this as an educator. I need to set classroom expectations. I need to see how it is that I communicate with my to the classroom. I need to think about my individual teacher-student communication. How am I communicating one-on-one with students? I think about student collaboration. And also, how are students communicating with each other? And so these are the set of skills that support the overarching idea of a positive learning climate, the competency of a positive learning climate. So when I think about engaging in my professional learning, well, if I can focus in on this skill level of student collaboration, let's just focus on that one. Of course, I need to work on all of these elements. Goes without saying. But what if I'm particularly struggling at keeping my students, engaged when collaborating with each other around the learning? You and I work together, I do a self-assessment, I establish that, I'm definitely allowing learning-focused interactions among my students. So I'm definitely at that beginning level of this particular skill of student collaboration. But I need to develop on this. I need to get better at this, because I tell the students to talk to one another, but then it kind of falls apart, and so then learning is disrupted, and I have to bring the students, re-engage them. So if I think about my developmental pathway, the skills pathway, well, for me to become more proficient in student collaboration, I need to provide structures for learners to support each other in their learning. Again, think of this. We're at a very finite skill level in this. I am permitting learning-focused interactions. That's centered on me. I know I'm doing this. My need is to now provide structures for learners to support each other. So that's where my professional learning is now going to be focused. Collaborative structures for students. Feel free to, in the question, respond. What are some collaborative structures that students can engage in, that I can implement them? One which is often presented when I walk educators through this scenario is a think, pair, share. A think, pair, share is a collaborative structure that I can implement in my classroom that helps students stay focused on the collaboration. So let me ask this question once again. Remember, I asked, if I'm having you work on mastering the standard, how much time will it take you? You said more or less a year. If I ask, if we go down to more the kind of indicator level, we're more finite in this, how much time do you need to be able to progress forward? You said at least a month. What if your professional learning, your professional development is just focused on moving from this beginning skill of student collaboration to the proficient skill of student collaboration, going from permitting learning-focused interactions to providing structures for learners? You're going to do this through learning how to do a think, pair, share, so many other collaborative structures that exist. How much time do you need to master this? So I'm your coach. I'm working with you. We talked about this, and I say, when should I come back to see you applying this in your classroom? So I can observe you, give you some feedback, think about what you're going to work on next. How much time would you need as a classroom teacher to progress on this skills pathway? Just one step. Okay. Ozzy writes in and says a week. Seems about right. So Ozzy, you're thinking about, and again, forgive me if I'm mispronouncing your name, but I really appreciate you contributing this answer. So Ozzy, I go into your classroom, I'm working with you, I'm trying to support you. You're thinking you can get better student engagement if you're able to implement good collaborative structures. We talk about it. You say a week. Come back in a week and see me doing this. What does this do for your sense of self-efficacy as a teacher if you're able to see measurable progress in a week versus a month or a year? So go ahead. I'd love to see a few of you respond to this. If we're able to scale down a teacher's growth in their skill set that has measurable impact on learning to a matter of a week or even days, what does this do for your self-efficacy as a professional, as a teacher? Just reflect on that for a moment. I'd love to see your responses. Milana writes in and says, it motivates me to keep doing what I'm doing. Yeah, this is like, I talked about my love of cooking. If I can figure out how to make good lasagna over the course of a few meals, a few attempts at this, and it's really good lasagna, well, I'm going to take on a new recipe. I want to keep engaging this because I love the feeling of improving at my craft. Teachers are the same. This motivates teachers. When teachers can quickly see, I focus on a particular skill that I'm applying in my classroom, I get better at it, I have better student engagement, hence I have better student learning. I'm going to take on the next skill. I'm going to keep working at this. Ozzy says, it gives great confidence in myself. And, we face a major challenge in education right now, and it's that most new teachers, 50% of new teachers are leaving within 5 years. There's a multitude of reasons why, but one I want to point in on is this lack of professional efficacy. If a teacher continues to be frustrated year after year, I don't feel like I'm becoming highly proficient at my profession, that teacher may start looking for a new profession. And so this sense of confidence and motivation, if we can scale professional learning down to the level of a skill, well, now in this teacher-centered orientation, well, now we've invited professional educators to own their professional growth, to really develop, to become awesome teachers. Milan also writes that if I see that my efforts are actually being utilized, then I will keep wanting to do well and even get better myself. Nazi adds to it, I'll try to perfect it. Exactly. It's like my daughter. She had to get to the end of that tree that was hanging out over the river. She was going to perfectly apply that skill of balance, and no one was going to pull her back from it. Teachers are the same. If I can see my target, and I have the freedom to learn, to implement it, I'm going to go for it. So we come to another issue with this. Now, this is all great and theoretical, of course, but how do we systemize this approach so that we can really support whole staffs, whole schools of teachers who are all driving their own professional growth? So the next thing that I want to go through is really how we see a growth and competency system being implemented, being operationalized. So a growth and competency system, first on the part of the teacher, if this teacher is focusing on the development of skills, which add up to a competency and really defined by those standards, there are 3 parts of this engagement: assess, learn, and practice. And so let's go back to the scenario we were describing about about my classroom management. So the first most important part of this is that this cycle, this growth cycle, has to begin with some sort of a formative assessment up front, a pre-assessment. Let's establish my level of proficiency. I want to work on classroom management, so let's establish my level of proficiency. Guess what? I'm giving opportunities for students to talk about the learning, but I'm not structuring the conversation. We've done a pre-assessment. I now know where I need to learn. My next bit of learning is to think about collaborative structures. Well, as soon as I know where my level is at, then if I have choice in my learning, I'm going to learn exactly in relation to what I need. So if I've been able to establish through this formative assessment that I need to learn about collaborative structures, I'm going to engage learning resources about collaborative structures. I'm not going to go to a non-related workshop unless it's a compliance issue. I'm going to engage in learning directly related to my own self-assessment. I engage in that learning. It's relevant to me. Well, I quickly want to apply it. Okay, so I need to work on collaborative structures. I've learned about a think, pair, share. Now I want to try it. I want to practice it. First time doesn't go too well. Well, that's all right. I can try it again. Goes a little better. I can refine it. Goes even better. And then I naturally go back to a point of reassessment. I'm assessing continuously through the cycle. How did it go? What else do I need to learn? Maybe I learned the structure of a think, pair, share, but now I want to learn about how do I frame the prompt? How do I frame the question for the think, pair, share? It's my next level of learning. I'm managing the think, pair, share well. Now I'm going to practice the question prompt. I'm going to practice and practice it until I've assessed it. Now I'm feeling like I'm mastering this. I'm really good at these collaborative structures. Now I can start incorporating other elements of building this positive learning climate. As I do this cyclically, and I'm really driving this, and I'm building skill upon skill upon skill upon skill, well, that now gives me the opportunity to say, I want to prove that I've mastered this particular approach. I'm a master teacher when it comes to positive learning climates. This is where, some of you may have heard about the discussion around micro-credentials. What are micro-credentials? Micro-credentials are an opportunity for a teacher to submit evidence of mastery of practice. And so I may feel so good about my positive learning climate that I have collected pieces of evidence that show my efficacy. I have a videotape of me teaching. I have a video of me teaching, where I'm showing me managing these collaborative structures. I have a lesson plan that I designed. I have a mind map that I went through with my students as we established our norms and values in the classroom. I have these different pieces of evidence that I submit. Someone in my system evaluates it, assesses it, determines, yeah, I'm pretty darn good at creating positive learning climates. Gives me a micro-credential. Now I have I'm distinguished within this particular competency of a positive learning climate. Well, the awesome thing as a professional educator, if I now have this micro-credential, I can now engage in the role of being a mentor to other teachers, supporting others. I get to stay in the classroom and I get to support others in their development because I've shown mastery in a particular competency. Other teachers can trust I am valuable as a mentor because I've already proven that I'm competent within this. This is the beauty of this growth and competency system, is that we're handing the power back to the teacher to really focus on the cycle of growth around skills. But as a teacher becomes highly proficient in these skills, we also want to recognize it through a micro-credential or a badge or some other recognition of mastery. So that teachers can really say, I'm truly good at my craft. A question which often comes up as we go through this is the whole role of evaluation, of teacher evaluation. A teacher evaluation can play a part in this growth and competency system. But I encourage people to be very careful about that, because you have to look and say, do the teachers in our system trust the evaluation process or not? If teachers aren't trusting the evaluation process, I would keep it separate from this growth and competency system so the individual teacher can really own their own growth and development. So one of the things we're doing at School Improvement Network, when we think about our Edivate platform, we're really thinking about the components of Edivate, an on-demand professional development platform, how it supports this process. So remember, we talked about assess, learn, practice, and master. Well, Edivate Observe serves that purpose of assessing. It's whether it's a peer observing me or even potentially a self-assessment. I can use that tool to really analyze my own proficiency. Engaging in this learn process, so I've established where I'm at, what do I need to focus on. Well, at Edivate, we have an immense content there. There's content you can turn to learn how do I do a think, pair, share. But then as I practice it, remember I shared the example of the teacher videotaping, videoing him or herself so they can see themselves actually applying it. Well, the review tool through Edivate provides that. It gives an opportunity for me to post an example of me teaching and let my peers comment on it. And then really we continue to look at this micro-credential tool, really being able to assess evidence of mastery. So it's an exciting time for us because we really do believe that this growth and competency system has the power to fundamentally impact a teacher's improvement, to hand back to the individual teacher their own growth and development. Let the teacher own this process. Let the teacher own what they're going to work on. There's real power in that. Remember, from Ossie, what you had said, that we're reducing down the time of development to potentially a week, which means we've kind of energized the whole efficiency of this process. Teachers believe that I can quickly improve upon my skills. I get better and better at teaching, which means I have more and more results with my students. That's fundamental to a teacher feeling successful and proud within their practice. In closing, and then I'll be able to take some questions. I know I've been talking for a while, but thank you so much for participating. I love showing this image and talking about Mogadishu, Somalia is an example of a quantum leap. And so what is a quantum leap? Well, a quantum leap is really where a society or a culture, a group of people radically shift in their expectation and the way they experience the world. It's a huge jump in progress, a fast, huge jump in progress. So the reason why I show Mogadishu, Somalia, this was really fascinating. A bit back, I heard a story on NPR, and the interviewer was talking to a war zone reporter. And they were talking about Somalia, and Somalia at the time was a fully anarchic state. There was no government in place, running Mogadishu. It was purely warlords. And so the interviewer asked this war zone reporter, how is it that you're able to upload your stories, the video that you're taking, communicate back to home? You're in a place with no government, with no infrastructure. And this reporter talked about Mogadishu and said, guess what? Mogadishu has the best digital connectivity on earth. And the interviewer goes, what? Are you serious? And the reporter goes, I can upload video faster than any other place on earth in Mogadishu. I have total connectivity wherever I go. And the interviewer goes, how is this even possible? And so this war zone reporter says, it's really a quantum leap. In Mogadishu, a few years earlier, there was no telephone system. There were 0 data networks. So a warlord has some extra cash, reaches out to Alcatel, the French company that sets up these data networks. And in a matter of a few months, they bought the best system on the market. It's fully implemented. The reason it works so well is that in Mogadishu, they did not have to tie it back to a legacy system. There were no legacy phone lines. There were no multiple carriers that you have to make sure all can communicate with one another. It's one reason why in the US, we have a slow rate of progress in terms of our digital connectivity because everything has to be tied back to a legacy system. In Mogadishu, there wasn't that limitation. So in a matter of months, they go from not being connected to being one of the most highly connected places on earth. I truly believe that when we're talking about a master teacher, if we implement this growth and competency system focused on the skill development, reduce professional learning, simplify professional learning to its skills, let a teacher work at that level, we're going to see this quantum leap. We're going to see teachers who have struggled to feel proficient rapidly grow, in their sense of efficacy and their ability to apply great pedagogy in the classroom. And what's the result? Better student learning. We can't ask for anything more. So I really appreciate you spending this time with me today. And I'm going to hang on for a few moments and see if any of you have any questions. Please feel free to pose them to me. And let us know as well if you want us to reach out and speak with you in more depth to show you how the system really works, how it might actually impact professional development in your own school or system. So thank you very much. I look forward to any questions you might have, and I look forward to you joining me in our next webinar. Thank you much.
Thank you very much, Curtis. We'll just stay on the line for a few minutes to wait for any questions that might come in. I know Curtis can see those, so he'll just read them and answer them at the time. I do appreciate everyone's attendance today at today's webinar. This webinar is being recorded, and I will send out an email tomorrow to all of you with a copy of the presentation and also the link to the recording of the webinar. Please feel free to share that with any of your colleagues, and we appreciate your attendance. Thank you.